Hello, everyone. This is Ronnie again. I wanted to share with you some ideas about the information that you get to make decisions regarding, your diet, your lifestyle, your health, and all the rest of it. What you eat, what you don't eat, and everything else regarding that. And what I've realized over the years is a lot of the things that I accepted as being just the basic kind of common sense guidance that I assumed was had a kind of everyone knew this. It was sort of scientifically must have been proven and everyone understood it. A lot of those things that I assumed were correct and truthful, I started to learn were not so. And when I started to look further into this, and as I've been learning more and more about health and healthy lifestyle and healthy diet for human beings, I started to realize that a lot of the information that people assume is the I'm trying to think of the right words. I don't want to use the word scientific. Uh, you know, the real information, the real truthful, foundational, basic, whatever information about diet, lifestyle, health. That a lot of that information did not come from the world of science and wasn't coming out of scientific studies. A lot of that information, and it continues to be the case, was coming from companies looking to promote their products, and sometimes from entire industries looking to promote their particular products, and therefore putting out stories into the world that would make their product look favorable and look healthy and look like something that people had to have. Sometimes some of these messages had some level of science and evidence around them, or maybe had previous scientific theories around them that were later disproven. But still, they were designed. The messages were designed to get people to consume more of particular products. And one of the things that was worked out in the food industry was that connecting foods to particular nutrients and making it seem like those foods were essential without actually saying it was something that worked really well. So all of the dairy products were connected with calcium, for example, and that was connected with bones. Even though calcium isn't just about bones, and bones aren't just about calcium, but and obviously calcium's not just about milk, but all these things got connected together, and people made an assumption out of it. I'm not sure if the advert said you need milk for calcium and you need calcium for your bones. I don't know if the initial advertising or things said that, and it might be so far back that who knows when that idea started to get put out there. But it's almost um, unquestionable that that information was put out there by, for example, the dairy industry in some way. Um, and that the dairy industry, essentially, the way it works, individual farmers aren't going out there and promoting their milk. Uh, there are huge distributors that will buy lots of the milk from all these individual farmers, and all these distributors are probably giving money to a milk board at the top, and their job is to try and increase the market of milk for all the farmers and for all the distributors. So none of them are actually involved in like the advertising and marketing of their own milk, but to the public. But the dairy board or whoever it is, whatever they're called, they're taking money from all these organisations to do that for them, essentially, as an industry as a whole. So there's that, and there's also ones connected with meat. I think in America there's one called the Meat Packers Union or Association or whatever. And then there's eggs, and all these different animal products in particular have these these kind of lobbying groups, essentially marketing groups, that have been putting out these messages for years and using increasingly, um, effective and complicated strategies to do so, including product placement, putting products into films and into TV shows way back in the day, radio programs, and all the rest of it. Advertising with celebrities, of course, but putting information out that looks like scientific information, that sounds like scientific information. And that information has become so entrenched in our culture that even people that are quite scientific assume that it's coming from a scientific background. When it comes to, for example, protein, there was a problem where protein was initially at one point theorized or thought to be like the most important nutrient, or a very important nutrient, and that the reason we had to eat meat was because of protein, and if we could only increase protein in people's diets, that would improve people's health. And T. Colin Campbell, who's the writer of a book called The China Study, and the writer of the China Study itself, which was, I believe, the biggest ever epidemiological study on diet conducted. Initially, he was involved in trying to increase protein in the diets in other countries. And in his estimation, when they increased protein in the diets of other countries through things like using milk and dairy products and things like that, and all of that was connected in with the US having an abundance of milk and having an abundance of dairy products, and probably the Western world in general having just an abundance of milk, because in the Second World War, this is all getting a bit complicated now. I don't know, maybe this story's getting too complicated. But the Second World War, what was realized was, by a number of countries, was that they weren't producing enough of their own food. So they incentivized farmers to produce more food. Okay, so they gave subsidies or money or whatever towards farmers to produce more. They encouraged them to produce more food. The farmers then did that. And here's the strange thing about politics and government and things like that. The war then comes to an end, and there's no need for these payments to continue. But for whatever reason, the payments do continue, but change. They're no longer, because now they had an absolute surplus. They had too much. Instead of just taking taking the payments away, which would then naturally have just made them produce less, but it would have probably made a lot of farmers struggle, right? But instead of doing that, they kept the payments going, but the incentive was to not produce too much. So farmers were then being paid, and I think this still happens to this day to some extent, to not produce food to some degree, or essentially to not use fields and certain pieces of land to produce food, but to leave them empty, and maintain them. Now, I'm not an expert around that subject, but there's something like that essentially. So these payments started in the Second World War. They've continued. And what it led to anyway was huge, massive excess of dairy, which was then stored as cheese, essentially. And in America and the US, it led to a lot of programs trying to get more dairy into the diet, which is crazy. But they were trying to get rid of all this cheese. And there's a thing, you might have heard of the phrase government cheese. Because I think there were programs where they gave out like cheap or free cheese to underprivileged people. And to some degree, they were subsidizing or encouraging more cheese into people's diets, more dairy into people's diets, to get rid of this cheese, to get rid of it. And I don't know how much that's led to obesity and a change in the diet, and and an increase in chronic disease, but probably hugely. That sequence of events probably hugely led to a lot of problems, because what was found and as I'm saying, trying to increase protein around the world, potentially because they're trying to get rid of this cheese and everything. So and then they realised that when they do increase protein in people's diets, it actually leads to negative health outcomes. And that was one of the things T. Colin Campbell noticed, and it started to change the way that he looked at diet. But generally, in the early days of nutrition, protein was seen as something, very important. Still to this day, people are worried about getting enough protein. And it was all connected with animal products. And this was all a complete misunderstanding. But that information is continued in our culture. But it really continues because people want a reason to justify eating animal products, because it's a very strange thing for human beings to do. It's not strange in terms of our history. We've eaten animals, but we've also eaten a lot of stuff, and we've been in very difficult situations where we didn't have a lot of food, so we ate animals. But humans don't really see animals as food. This is the whole bizarre thing about it. Until it is presented on a plate with sauce and colour and different smells and herbs around it, and totally not connected with the actual figure of a dead animal carcass. Or if there is a dead animal carcass, it's sometimes changed, or the head's removed, or the feathers are off it, or whatever. And it's just kind of a strange thing, in my eyes anyway. And if you were to walk out of your house in the morning and you're really starving for food, and you saw a dead animal lying on the street, there's no one that would eat that. Even if you saw it like collapse and die in that moment, no one sees that as food. So it's very bizarre. We don't see it as food. We don't have an instinct to eat that. But people are eating animals anyway. So there's a kind of a weird need for a justification for it. So that's one side of it. There's the marketing of unhealthy foods. It was also happened in obviously the cigarette industry, the tobacco industry, where you had things marketed for many years using things, not saying it was healthy, but saying things like doctors prefer camel and things like that. And the way that they did that, people think, oh, the doctors were conspiring. They put out a survey and just got doctors to answer a survey and maybe give them some money or something to answer a survey. And they just used those results to create advertising. It wasn't like the doctors were involved in it really, but it was common for people to smoke, so many doctors smoked. So most of the information that is about this food gives you this food gives you that. Orange juice is another example of it. So we can even look into the fruit world. Orange juice was another issue where farmers had an abundance of oranges. There was an abundance of oranges. I think this might have originated in Florida, maybe in the US. And so orange juice was invented, and it was turned into a breakfast accompaniment, right? So it's funny how much the diet is being influenced by various sort of industries requiring to do certain things and whatever. So they had this abundance of oranges, and they created orange juice. I mean, obviously orange juice is really simple and good thing to make, and a healthy thing generally, but it was created as a product. And how did they sell it? By saying it was rich in vitamin C. That was how they got the message across to the public, to have oranges and orange juice. And orange juice now is, maybe the most drunk juice in the world or whatever, fresh juice. And then you've got bananas, which no one had ever eaten a banana. Once again, up to probably around the Second World War or just before that, most people outside of the tropics had never eaten bananas. So they were introduced, and they were connected as being good for potassium, and neither of them are. Like, oranges and bananas are not particularly high sources of either of those. And there's plenty of no one had an issue with vitamin C or potassium in their diet really at that time. So it wasn't really required, but that information comes from marketing as well. Very little of our standard information about health and diet comes from nutrition science. It's a real problem. And I don't know if the solution is that everyone needs to have a course in school or something. But it's either coming from nutrition, it's either coming from marketing, and sometimes it's coming from kind of gurus writing diet books and things like that. There are people marketing themselves and marketing their own kind of diet, and they're not always wrong, but a lot of them are wrong. A lot of them their information is particularly good. So you've got Dr. Atkins, the low carb diet that got really out there a lot, has got out there a lot, but there you go. You've got all of that stuff on both sides. But then you've got another side to think about, which is there is marketing that even raw vegans and even quite smart raw food people are believing in. So you got to be aware of that. You have to question everything that you thought was real and true. And in the world of sort of alternative health outside of the conventional medical system, you've got the supplements and the superfoods and the tonics and the elixirs and the herbs and herbalism and all that stuff. And a lot of that stuff is sold along with the concept of things like the soil is deficient. And I hate hearing that. I've heard that over and over. And I began to question it when I looked into it. There was very little scientific information, basically none around, that would prove that the soil was bad, or the soil was deficient, or the food is deficient. This all came from advertising of the supplement industry. And a lot of people, especially people who have not really researched marketing, propaganda, and the world of business and what businesses are capable of doing. People, and it happens during this pandemic and everything, people think they just can't imagine that a pharmaceutical company would outright lie. They can't imagine that politicians or certain people would not tell the truth, or would not be doing a good job, or that the media would just invent things. They can't imagine that because they don't really have a good understanding of the history of the world of business, and that stuff happens all the time. Even with the most respected, nice brands that you think are so great, they're doing all sorts of crazy things. And it's just the nature of the world. It's not no one's setting out intending to be bad. They're just trying to get things done. They're trying to get their product out there. They're cutting corners. They're thinking, well, the means justify the goal or whatever, the ends justify the means, whatever. So they do all sorts of things that aren't quite real or honest or true. At the end of the day, there were many people that knew that tobacco was killing people, and they were still taking a paycheck and still getting paid and still working for companies, and they still are working for companies trying to get those cigarettes out to more people. So these things do happen, conspiracies do happen, and you have to really question the information that's out there. So that's a little message for the day, I suppose. Question a lot of the information you found and try and see, does it really come from a good, solid, accurate source, or is it coming from potentially from just a particular industry trying to get a message out there, a particular company, a particular product, trying to get it out there into the world, trying to make a message which sticks with people, which has an impact on people. If they'd said oranges are good for vitamin C, but so is like every other fruit, so don't worry about it. It doesn't work so well. right? So, um, but it's the public making up the rest of it. If you say to the public, this is a good source of vitamin C, it almost makes people think, well, it must be the only source. It almost makes people fill in that gap. Like, this is the only thing I know that has vitamin C, so that must be the thing with vitamin C. Like, it makes people fill in that gap. Anyway, our goal, or my goal, is trying to get some real good, solid, good evidence, good information that makes sense. It's very simple. And a lot of this stuff isn't very complicated when it comes to health. We make things very complicated, but it's not. And there's no need to really get scared. I would be scared. Be scared about your health if you're gonna eat a bad diet. You shouldn't be scared if you're on a raw vegan path. If you're eating more fruits and vegetables, you shouldn't be worried too much. Particularly a low-fat diet, you shouldn't worry too much. But our goal with the UK Fruitfest is putting out the best information we can, really good education level. That's what we try and do every year. And if you want more information about UK Fruitfest and finding out more about it, I'll put a link below this video and you can go and check out more and look at our film to see more about that and join the announcement list. We've had about 250 people so far who have registered their interest in coming. So, and we only have 100 odd spaces, a little bit smaller this year, but it'll be a great time and I think you'll really enjoy it and you won't regret it. So click on the link below. Thank you for following the channel. Feel free to leave a comment below and thank you for following.